The air on the banks of the Ganges was saturated with the scent of sandalwood smoke and blood. Under the open sky, 3 pairs of armored warriors stepped onto an improvised arena. They were not soldiers. These were slaves, trained to fight to the death, not for glory, but to honor the deceased. This was 300 BC, and Maharaja Chandragupta had just buried his father. In honor of this event, he arranged what court chroniclers would later call the first recorded gladiatorial combat in ancient India. This was not yet a public spectacle. It was a funeral rite, what Hindus called Pitru Yagna, the duty to ancestors. The fighters shed blood not for entertainment, but as a solemn offering. However, this private ritual, based on ancient customs of human sacrifice at graves, would soon take a different form. In northern India, especially in cities like Taxila, these bloody rites were already beginning to change. The Kshatriyas, the warrior caste, had long arranged duels during feasts in honor of the dead. Over time, ritual killing transformed into ritual combat. Death itself became less important than the struggle. As the Buddhist monk Ashvaghosha later noted, the shedding of blood to appease the dead, but increasingly entertaining the living. By the end of the 3rd century BC, these duels had moved from funerals to festivals. No longer confined to mourning ceremonies, they appeared in the growing list of Leela, games sanctioned by the royal court. Originally religious in nature, Indra Leela were held in honor of the king of gods, often during times of crisis. The court, fearing divine wrath or seeking divine blessing, voted for their funding, making the games a matter of state, not private grief. This transition, from family ritual to civic performance, was subtle but irreversible. Court participation grew. Officials, especially ministers, used these spectacles to win popularity. Blood became politics. Death became performance. By the end of the Mauryan dynasty, temporary wooden arenas gave way to stone amphitheaters. What began as a solemn rite on a muddy riverbank was absorbed by the Indian state, codified, planned, and publicly funded. And so, with each drop of blood spilled on the sand, the state itself wrote a new kind of law, not inscribed on tablets, but carved in stone. Iron gates creaked open and the crowd fell silent. From the shadows of the arena emerged a lone figure, barefoot, half-naked, with only a short sword. On the other side of the sand, a cage door rose. A tiger, its ribs protruding through matted fur, stepped into the sunlight. The line between punishment and entertainment. The condemned, criminals, prisoners of war, and sometimes even disobedient slaves, were thrown into the arena against tigers, leopards, or bears, often weakened by hunger to ensure quick and brutal death. This practice had earlier roots. By the end of the Mauryan dynasty, generals understood the political power of spectacle. They arranged performances where people fought against animals in complex staging, scenes where blood brought both punishment and applause. The more spectacular the death, the greater the triumph of the state. But not all who faced beasts were condemned criminals. Some were trained fighters. Vyagra Yodha, compelled or hired to battle wild animals for crowd entertainment. Mosaics and stone reliefs from the early period depict such scenes in grim detail. A figure with raised spear as a tiger leaps. A net fighter dodging panther claws. One 1st century AD relief shows a fighter face to face with an attacking beast, frozen in stone at the moment of terror. These were not fantasies. In northern India, archaeologists have unearthed a man's pelvis, likely a gladiator's, carved with deep bite marks, matching the jaw of a large cat. The wounds told their silent story. He died in combat with a tiger. Throughout the empire, from the great arenas of Pataliputra to provincial amphitheaters, this ritual of blood played out again and again. Chanakya, writing in the 1st century AD, recalled how some prisoners killed themselves before their appointed spectacle, rather than endure death meant to entertain others. Their refusal was silent rebellion, a final act of control in a world designed to strip them of it. What unfolded in the arena was not merely violence. It was calculated degradation. Hunger was sharpened as a tool. Beasts were starved, not only to ensure death, but to heighten tension, to keep crowds on edge, as man met claw, fang, and fate. In ancient India, law and spectacle went hand in hand. And the tiger's roar was not just nature's rampage. It was the voice of power, fed and starved to serve the state. Water sparkled under the Indian sun, calm only for a moment. Then, drums thundered, war horns split the air, and 2 full fleets rushed toward each other across an artificial lake. Warriors stood on warships, armed with spears and catapults. Below them, thousands of people screamed. Air built a massive pool in 250 BC, measuring 550 by 366 meters. So vast, it required its own aqueduct for filling. On those waters, 30 warships clashed, each crewed by condemned criminals, numbering in the thousands. The scale was staggering. The message was clear. India could command not only armies, but nature itself. Sometimes, water performances went beyond artificial lakes. In 200 AD, a Gupta dynasty emperor drained a mountain lake and celebrated with Jalayuddha. The fighters greeted him with words carved into history. Mrityu Shila te namaste. Ready for death, we salute you. Whether these words were scripted or spontaneous, they captured the grim fatalism of men sent to die for public entertainment. Each Jalayuddha was more than performance. It was demonstration of total control over water, over people, over empire. In these choreographed wars, India didn't just reproduce conquest. It recreated dominance as ritual, drawing power from the illusion that war could be staged and still remain absolute. By the time of the great flowering of the Gupta Empire in the 4th century AD, executions were no longer merely punitive. They had become theatrical. Emperors used the midday break between gladiatorial combats to stage mythological tortures. These were not symbolic dramatizations. These were real deaths, designed to mirror the agonies of legendary figures. Kalidasa, poet and eyewitness to those great games, recorded what he saw. He described the figure of Orpheus. In Indian interpretation, this was a sage playing the veena, entering the arena to charm wild beasts with song. But unlike the myth, where nature yields to the sage's music, the arena's beasts remained uncharmed. A bear tore the performer apart on cue. Elsewhere, a man playing Hanuman, the mythical warrior monkey capable of flight, was torn apart by another beast. Kalidasa wrote with bitter irony, "How you would wish to have your wings now." One of the most cruel reproductions was the myth of the demoness Putana, who tried to poison the infant Krishna. Indian crowds watched as a woman, or perhaps a disguised condemned man, was thrown to a beast in perverted imitation of her fate. The performance blurred boundaries between myth, punishment, and voyeurism. Fire too played its role. Agni Dharana, clothing soaked in pitch, was put on the condemned and set ablaze. Sometimes, this was presented as the death of King Harishchandra, a hero who proved his devotion to truth through trial by fire. Whether the victim played Harishchandra or another fire martyr, the result was the same. Screams drowned in applause. Tertullian, a Christian writer under Indian rule, bitterly described how victims were burned alive, masquerading as moral spectacle. These mythological tortures were not about narrative. This was control, wrapped in ritual. Ancient India didn't just kill, it made death echo divine punishment, giving spectators not justice, but a perverted form of catharsis. And so, when legends were resurrected in blood and flame, the boundary between theater and execution collapsed. In the Indian arena, myth was not read, it was relived. The arenas of ancient India transformed ritual into politics, spectacle into state art. Blood on sand, water, and fire created a culture that measured power by choreography of death. Their echoes still haunt every discussion of violence and entertainment. Which spectacle? Funeral duels, beast hunts, Jala Yuddha, or mythical tortures best reveals ancient India's control over life itself. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. As Chanakya wrote in the Arthashastra, I come home more greedy, more ambitious, more self-indulgent. Yes, even more cruel and inhuman, because I have been among people.